Good afternoon. This is Misty with the Department of Education, and today's training is on the 2023 Summer Food Service Program Procurement Plan. Please note that this training is intended for non-school food authorities that participate in Summer Food Service Program. School food authorities that participate in summer feeding should continue to follow their current approved procurement plan that they've used during the school year. Procurement is an important topic, so I want to mention that in today's training, we will go over some of the same information we discussed in the Procurement 101 training last week, as it's essentially part of the procurement plan. Each SFA sponsor, summer feeding sponsor, must have documented procurement procedures. A procurement plan provides for free and open competition, transparency in transactions, comparability, and documentation of all procurement activities. The summer sponsor must maintain all the procurement plan and records of all procurement documents on site for the state agency and/or USDA to review. A sample procurement plan can be found under the procurement section on the CNP website. There is a link on this slide along with a snippet of what it looks like. Please note that this is a sample plan. You will see throughout the sample procurement plan document, there are highlighted areas that should be changed to be reflective of your summer feeding program. This needs to be kept on file and made available for state agency or USDA to review. All sponsors participating in summer feeding must have a signed code of conduct for all persons engaged in the awarding and administration of contracts that are supported with child nutrition funds. The summer feeding sponsor must maintain written standards of conduct. The code of conduct form must cover conflicts of interest and govern the actions of employees. It is required for employees that are engaged in the selection, award, and administration of contracts. It prohibits employees from participating in the procurement process. And if there is a real or apparent conflict of interest. It prohibits employees from soliciting or accepting gratuities, favors, and anything of monetary value from contractors. It must include disciplinary action to be applied for violations. The USDA Code of Conduct prototype form can be found under the procurement section on the Child Nutrition Program website. Please refer to the link on the bottom of this slide for the form. The summer sponsor may utilize their own organization's code of conduct as long as it addresses all of the requirements discussed in the previous slide. Remember that each person involved in the procurement process must sign the code of conduct form. It's a requirement for participating in the summer food service program. Program integrity is the main focus of USDA. To that end, USDA has included procurement as an integral part of the administrative review process for all programs. The procurement regulations are not new. The concentrated focus on the procurement process and ensuring program integrity has been in effect for a few years now. Unfortunately, we are still finding a significant number of sponsors that are not completing the procurement process for purchases and others who are utilizing it incorrectly. It's for this reason that we continue to have trainings on this very important topic. This is the main takeaway on the topic of procurement. Every dollar that you spend of the federal government's money must be procured by one of the 3 procurement methods allowed by USDA. So let's talk about determining the method of procurement. This slide demonstrates how the value of procurement corresponds to the procurement thresholds. On May 31st, 2022, Governor John Bel Edwards signed House Bill 221, Act 204 into law. This act increases the micro-purchase threshold from $10,000 to $30,000 and the small purchase threshold from $30,000 to $60,000. The effective date was August 1st, 2022. The small purchase threshold is now $60,000. When the value of the purchase is estimated at less than or equal to $60,000, informal methods, which is either micro purchase or the small purchase method, may be followed. Small purchases between $30,000 but less than $60,000 require competition, which means quotes must be obtained for the products specified from at least 3 bidders. The last procurement method is what we refer to as formal procedures. These are sealed bids, IFB, or competitive proposals, RFP, that require public advertising and are more rigorous. Act 204 states that all purchases of any materials or supplies exceeding the sum of $60,000 to be paid out of public funds shall be advertised and let by contract to the lowest responsible bidder who has a bid according to the specifications advertised. All procurement procedures require documentation of how the solicitation was conducted, the responses received, how responses were evaluated and awarded, and the monitoring of the contract performance. Before beginning the procurement process, the sponsor must determine the method of procurement they need to utilize based on the estimated dollar amount to be spent. Take this example. Last summer, the sponsor purchased meats, frozen items, pantry items, and chemicals from the same distributor. The dollar amount spent during the previous summer was $44,000. It is estimated that food costs have increased about 3% this year, so we're estimating we will spend about $45,320 during the summer program this year. The sponsor can do a formal bid or a small purchase because the estimated amount we are spending is less than $60,000, which is the small purchase threshold. Since it's less than $60,000, you made the decision to utilize small purchase procedures. However, please note that if you serviced 4 sites last year and intend to have 2 additional sites this year, you would need to change to a formal bid as you would be at or near the $60,000 threshold. Now let's take a look at this example. If we know from the start that our expenses will exceed the small purchase threshold, we know we must do a formal procurement. In this example, meat, frozen, pantry, and chemicals were purchased from the same distributor and the expenses totaled $75,000. We know that we have exceeded the $60,000 small purchase threshold and must do a formal bid. As discussed before, the invitation for bid is normally used for food items because price is the most important factor. Now let's talk about micro purchases. The micro purchase method is typically used for emergency type purchases. It is used to purchase supplies or services where the dollar amount of the purchase does not exceed $30,000. As a reminder, 2 CFR 200.320 states that the maximum extent practicable, program operators should distribute micro purchases equally among qualified suppliers. The micro purchase method is not to be used in order to circumvent free and open competition. In other words, the micro purchase method of procurement cannot be used so that you don't have to obtain quotes or formal bids. Micro purchases may be awarded without soliciting competitive price or rate quotations if the sponsor considers the price to be reasonable based on research, experience, purchase history, or other information and documents it files accordingly. If micro purchase procurement is used several times in a year for the same product or products, it is likely that the small purchase procurement method should have been used. Summer feeding operators using the micro purchase method may not purchase from only one source. Rather, purchases must be regularly made using available qualified sources. This provides qualified sources the opportunity for business or spreading the wealth. No competitive price quotation is necessary for the purchase and no cost or price analysis applies. However, The program operator's written procurement procedures must include a procedure that such purchases must be rotated among qualified suppliers. Micro-purchases procedures in your procurement plan must include how equitable distribution of micro-purchases among qualified suppliers will be accomplished. So let's look at some examples. Okay, this is an example from a procurement plan. Each of these planned purchases are using the micro-purchase method. As you can see from this procurement plan, the sponsor has decided what items they will purchase using the micro-purchase method. The first is cleaning supplies. The sponsor plans to alternate between purchasing these supplies from Walmart, Dollar General, and Lowe's. They're also purchasing some other groceries, such as some items that the sponsor was unable to get from the contracted vendor, and they're going to alternate the purchases between Rouse's, Costco, and Walmart. The sponsor needs to make sure that they distribute these micro purchases equally. The summer food service program operators should distribute micro purchases equally among qualified suppliers. I'm sorry, this must be a duplicate slide. No, the summer food service program operators should distribute micro purchases equally among qualified suppliers. The use of the micro purchase method is one of the major findings we have on procurement reviews because sponsors do not spread the wealth among qualified suppliers. An exception to spreading the wealth would be when the sponsor or the site is in a small town that has only one grocery store and the next closest grocery store is possibly 40 miles away. If this is the case, it should be reflected in the procurement plan. This will be shown in the example on the next slide. So let's look at this example. If your summer feeding program is in a small rural area and there's only one local store within reasonable distance, make sure to indicate that on your procurement plan. In this example, Rivertown Market is the only grocery store within 40 miles. In this instance, it is not reasonable to expect the summer feeding sponsor to utilize more than one grocery store. So now let's talk about small purchase procedures. The small purchase procurement threshold is $60,000 or less. It's $250,000 or less for charter schools. Summer food service programs, except for charter schools, have the small purchase threshold of $60,000. You also need to know if you have a local small purchase threshold that is less than $60,000. If not, you will use the state small purchase threshold for procurement. In all cases, the law requires that 3 quotes to be obtained. When utilizing small purchase procurement method, commonly referred to as quotes, you must have written specifications and provide them to each vendor. These specifications should provide clear and accurate descriptions of all products and technical requirements. Price quotes must be obtained from at least 3 responsible and responsive vendors. And of course, you must document all quotes and maintain them on file. As you can see in this example of a procurement plan, the sponsor states what companies they plan to contact for quotes for produce and milk. If a sponsor finds additional possible vendors, they can add them to the list. Remember that strong competition leads to lower prices. This sponsor is small, so they are going to get weekly quotes for produce, but be reminded that the total purchases for summer feeding programs must not exceed the $60,000 threshold. USDA requires quotes to be obtained from at least 2 sources. However, Louisiana revised statute states that 3 documented quotes are required for purchases between $30,000 and $60,000. When awarding small purchase procurements, the sponsor should award to the responsive and responsible vendor that has the lowest price. Responsive means that the vendor submits a bid that conforms to all specifications and terms of the contract. Responsible means that the vendor is capable of performing successfully under the terms of the contract. All procedures used in the small purchase procurement must be documented and maintained on file. Now let's discuss formal procurement. Your procurement plan is your guide for how you intend to conduct procurement. When the value of the purchase is expected to exceed the $60,000 threshold, use one of the following. Competitive sealed bidding, commonly called an invitation for bid or IFB, or competitive proposal, commonly called request for proposal or RFP. Competitive sealed bidding procedures use an invitation for bid. These are publicly solicited and a firm fixed price contract is awarded. There may be one contract awarded to the most responsive and responsible bidder that has the lowest overall price, or multiple awards may be made if the sponsor states in the IFB that awards may be made to multiple bidders based on unit price by item or group of items. So when is an invitation for bid used? The sealed bid method, or IFB, is the preferred method when a complete, adequate, and realistic specification or purchase description is available, and two or more responsible bidders are willing and able to compete effectively for the business. If you are unable to get two or more responsible bidders that are willing and able to compete effectively for the business, you will want to consider obtaining vendor's statement of no bid. There is a sample form that can be found in the sample procurement plan. This form will also give you some valuable information as to why a vendor may not be bidding on the current bid that may in turn help you when preparing future bids. On this slide is a snippet of the form. You are encouraged to seek out and request a statement of no bid in order to maintain compliance with federal and state procurement requirements whenever there is limited competitive bidding. Now let's look at the competitive proposal, or RFP. A competitive proposal uses a request for proposal which describes how technical and cost factors will be considered in making the final determination for the purchase of goods and services. This results in the award of either a fixed price contract or a cost reimbursable contract. Competitive proposals are conducted with more than one source submitting an offer. It is generally used when conditions are not appropriate for the use of sealed bids. If this method is used, requirements apply. If you are utilizing an RFP, a set of weighted awarded criteria in the form of a weighted evaluation sheet must be included. Price is not the only factor, but it must be the primary factor in awarding the contract. Price must count for more than any other factor. Again, this procurement is typically used when the service is involved. It is not typically used for purchase of food and supplies, where vendors are bidding on the same products and price is the important factor. This is a sample RFP scorecard that can also be found in the sample procurement plan. The sponsor can include their own scoring criteria and weight of each criteria as long as price is the primary factor. The contract is awarded to the bidder whose proposal is both responsive and the most advantageous to the sponsor. The bidder that receives the highest number of points based on the award criteria is awarded the bid. Note that in formal procurement, and on this this formal procurement table of the procurement plan, the sponsor would include all formal procurements that they anticipate they will need. In this example, the sponsor plans to purchase frozen food and canned foods from the same vendor and award as a bottom line bid. They can do this as long as they have 3 or more companies that are able and willing to compete. The sponsor also plans to use an IFB for paper and plastic supplies and will award it as a bottom line bid. In order for a vendor to be responsive, they must be able to supply all of the items the sponsor is requesting. Using a bottom line bid can also be risky as there may be no vendor that carries all of the items you need. If that is a possibility, you may want to consider an item by item or line item bid. State law requires that procurement to be published twice in a regional news source, with the first advertisement being at least 15 days before the bid opening. The sponsor may also want to publish the bid utilizing an electronic bid platform. The advertisement must contain a general description of the items to be purchased, the deadline for submitting questions and the date that written responses will be provided, the date of the pre-bid meeting and if attendance is required. A pre-bid meeting is not required, but if you plan to have a pre-bid meeting, it should be included in the advertisement. The deadline for submitting proposals, both the date and the time. The address where the solicitation can be obtained must be included in the advertisement. And as always, with any information provided to the public, the USDA non-discrimination statement must be included. The bid document must include detailed information about your bid. It must include the contract period, the date, time, and location of your bid opening, how the vendor will be informed of the results, and the terms and conditions that each bidder must fulfill to be evaluated. The bid document must also include benefits to sponsor if contractor does not perform as contracted. There must also be a statement in the bid regarding the return of purchase incentives, discounts, rebates, and credits that must be returned to the summer food service account. If the sponsor is going to allow piggybacking, it must be included in the original bid document. And if the sponsor is going to allow an escalation or de-escalation of prices based on a cost index, that also must be included in the original bid document. The bid document must clearly define the method of evaluation and the type of contract. Any specific bid procedures must be included in the bid document. A statement must be included that requires the sponsor and vendor to give access to the program and documents by the state agency USDA. The document must also include provision requiring the contractor to maintain all records for 3 years after final payment.
Into this thing for procurement.
The sponsor must provide a description of the order process that it will be expected from the winning vendor. The bid document must also include the statement of non-collusion, debarment, and lobbying certificates and lobbying activities. These are required of all vendors and should be signed and included in the bid documents when the vendor returns the bid documents to the sponsor. These can be found on the sample procurement plan. And lastly, the sponsor must provide detailed specification and estimated quantities they intend to purchase. The sponsor should provide as much detail as possible to ensure prospective vendors are bidding on the exact same items. All formal solicitations must include the affirmative action steps as outlined in 2 CFR 200-321. These steps are intended to assure that minority businesses, women's business enterprises, and labor surplus area firms are used when possible.
What?
The affirmative action steps must also be included in the bid solicitation. The affirmative action steps will include placing qualified small and minority businesses and women's business enterprises on solicitation list, assuring that small and minority businesses and women's businesses are solicited whenever they are potential sources, dividing total requirements when economically feasible into smaller tasks or quantities to permit maximum participation by small and minority businesses and women businesses enterprises. Also establishing delivery schedules where the requirement permits, which encourage participation by small and minority businesses and women businesses enterprises. Using services and assistance as appropriate of such organizations as the Small Business Administration and the Minority Business Development Agency of the Department of Commerce, and requiring the prime contractor, if subcontracts are to be let, to take the affirmative step listed in paragraphs 1 through 5 of this section. In other words, the first 5 items that we just discussed. All formal bids must include these provisions from Appendix 2 of CFR 200. The bid must include the administrative, contractual, or legal remedies the SFA plans to take if the vendor breaches the contract. It must include language concerning termination for cause and convenience. The sample procurement plan has some sample language that can be used. The equal employment opportunity provision must be included. The Davis-Bacon Act is only applicable if the contract is for construction. And if you refer to the sample procurement plan, you will notice that these are already included. Appendix 2 of 2 CFR 200 also requires the following provisions: contract work hours and safety standards, rights to inventions, Clean Air Act and Federal Water Pollution Control Act, debarment and suspension, and Bird Anti-Lobbying Amendment and Certificate. Again, if you refer to the sample procurement plan, you will notice that these are already included. It also requires the following provisions: procurement of recovered materials, minority businesses, women's enterprises, and labor surplus, as we discussed previously, and the Buy American provision, if applicable. Again, if you refer to the sample procurement plan, again, these are all in there. It's already included. Additional contract provisions include the requirement that a vendor must comply with the following civil rights laws: Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the Age Discrimination Act of 1975, Title VII CFR Parts 15, 15A, and 15B, the Americans with Disability Acts, FNS instruction, civil rights compliance, and enforcement in school nutrition. The language for this is also included in the sample procurement plan. Again, if you refer to the sample procurement plan, you will see that there is a checklist for sponsors of the required provisions for all formal bids. On this slide is a snippet of part of the checklist that is included in the sample procurement plan. Use the checklist to make sure all items are included on all formal bids. The next type of procurement is the non-competitive proposals. This procurement method is used if items are available only from a single source when the award of a contract is not feasible under small purchase, sealed bid, or competitive negotiation. Prior state agency approval is required for any and all non-competitive proposals. Contracts that have been awarded by the State of Louisiana Office of State Purchasing may only be utilized by the sponsor if all of the federal requirements are met. See Memo SFS 18-79 for the requirements for using state contracts. The sponsor must have applied for and received approval from the Louisiana Office of State Purchasing in order to use their contracts. Any vendor who has demonstrated poor performance during a current or previous agreement with the school food authority, summer feeding sponsor, may be considered a non-responsible bidder, and their bid may be rejected as long as the sponsor has proper documentation. The sample procurement plan contains sample termination language for termination for convenience, termination for cause, and disqualifying a bidder. The summer feeding sponsor must maintain all procurement documents, which include but are not limited to the actual procurement plan, any invoices, receipts, the original IFB or RFP, documents showing where the public announcement of the IFB or RFP was made and the date, responses received from vendors or bidders to the IFB or RFP, the scoring of the RFP, documents showing any negotiations that were made with the responders to an RFP, and the final contract. When you have a finding on a procurement review, it is very important to correct the issue. If the state agency comes to your organization to review your procurement documents at a later date and the problems have not been corrected, the state agency can determine the finding as a serious deficiency. The state agency or USDA could determine that fiscal action needs to be taken. This could include requiring repayment of all reimbursement of meals during that period of time. Repeat findings on procurement could result in termination from the Summer Food Service Program. As we discussed earlier, proper procurement is the main focus of USDA. If you have any questions, please contact the Louisiana Department of Education Division of Nutrition Support at 225-342-9661 or email us at childnutritionprograms@la.gov. And I will check the chat box to see if we have any questions, and I'll be back in a couple of minutes. I see in the chat box that someone is saying they can't hear. There will be this has been recorded, so you can find the recording as well as the slides on Louisiana Fit Kids. It should be posted within 48 hours. At this time, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat box. Again, you can always contact us at the number listed, or you can send us an email. And as always, you can refer to any of the links that were posted on a slide, especially where you can find the sample procurement plan. I did reference that a lot during this training because a lot of that information is already there for you. You just need to basically take that sample procurement plan and make those changes that are reflective to your program. So with that, hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon, and we will see you for the next training. Thank you.